Then on Sports Central, we go over our next schedule preview this offseason, and it's going to be the Tennessee Volunteers, a team that went 7-6 overall in the 2021 season. Overall, not a bad season for Tennessee, but this team definitely shows potential going into 2022. And why that is we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with some notable games from last season. This team, of course, 7-6 overall. Not a bad season for this team. They did play a pretty tough schedule overall. I mean, Pitt turned out to be a really good team. They made it to a really good bowl game, and I mean, Pitt in the end, 34-41. Tennessee took a loss there, but it was a close game, and I mean, it was definitely an excellent game too. And for Tennessee, I mean, this team, they took a lot of close losses to some really good opponents. I mean, if you look at Ole Miss, that game too, they lost to them by 5, lost to Purdue by 3 in their bowl games. So, I mean, Tennessee, this team was 7-6, but talent-wise, they very much could have been a 8 or a 9 win team at least. They beat Missouri 62-24. That was an impressive win on the road there against a good opponent. Scored 62 on Missouri. Beat South Carolina 45-20. Lost Ole Miss once again by 5. That was a crazy game, that's for sure. Beat Kentucky on the road 45-42. That was an impressive win over a really good Wildcat team, and they did lose to Purdue there in a shootout by 3 there, 45-48. So, I mean, 7-6 was the record last season for Tennessee, but, I mean, it still was a good season for this team. They played generally pretty well, and even though 7-6 might not be the most impressive record, this team still definitely impressed me last season, and they're very worthy once again of potentially being an 8 or a 9 win team for sure. 4-2 in their first 6 games, then 3-4 in their last 7. Here's roster prep going into the next season. This team, return production wise, you can see why this team definitely is on the watch list of a lot of analysts, is because, I mean, of the returning production. Hendon Hooker, he's coming back, your starting quarterback from last season. Overall impressive season for him. He put up 2,900 yards, 31 touchdowns, 3 picks. I mean, his touchdown interception ratio last season, look at that, 31-3 was his touchdown interception ratio last season. So, I mean, that's definitely impressive out of him. He also put up a 68% completion rate. So, Hendon Hooker, I mean, last season, that was probably his best season to date, was with Tennessee last season. Jabari Smith, your top running back, is returning. Last season, he put up over 800 yards and then 9 touchdowns. So, I mean, this team, running back position looks pretty good. You got, although Evans, your second running back, he is transferring away. So you do lose him. Last season, he put up over 500 yards, nearly 607 touchdowns. But you do return Jalen Wright, your third running back from last season. He had over 430 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, running back position, I'm not too concerned about it. Jabari Smith, and then, of course, Jalen Wright should do just fine there. And then Hendon Hooker, of course, also had over 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. Hendon Hooker really was underappreciated last season. I will say that. I mean, if you look at his stats, statistically, he was excellent last season. Did not make too many mistakes. I mean, he was a dual threat quarterback for sure. I mean, he's really good passer. I mean, 31-3 was his touchdown interception ratio, plus over 600 yards of rushing. I mean, it was a good season for him. Receiving, of course, Cedric Tillman, he's going to be returning. Top receiver from last season. He put up over 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns. And then, of course, you got Velus Jones Jr. You're losing your second running back and then your third as well, and Javonte Payton. So, of course, if you look at Payton there, he put up over 400 yards, 6 touchdowns. Velus Jones over 800. So, receiving core does take a couple of hits there, but Tillman coming back, keep an eye on him. He's gonna be a really, I would say, one of the most talented receivers for sure in the SEC going into next season. They do this 1 on the offensive line, 2 defensive linemen, and then 3 in the secondary. So, the secondary, you're losing a couple there for sure. But otherwise, I mean, the returning production looks, I would say, pretty promising for this team. Offensively, they should be pretty good once again. And then defensively as well. I mean, a couple things need to happen. There's a couple question marks on the defense, but otherwise looks pretty good, I would say, for Tennessee going into next season. I mean, is this team, though, brings up the question, is this team a dark horse SEC contender going into next season? I mean, this team kind of underachieved and went 7-6 last year. I mean, this team is very capable of being potentially causing some noise, that's for sure. And they're very capable of getting a few upsets. Potentially we see this team, I don't know if they'll win the SEC by any means, but definitely they can make it to a pretty good bowl game. This team definitely shows potential going into next season. Here's your transfer portal and recruiting going into next year. This team hasn't been terribly active in the transfer portal. Of course, you got Marley, a receiver who's transferring away. You got Joseph, linebacker, who's off to FAU. You got Mincy, an offensive tackle coming in from Florida. Jackson Hannon, a linebacker from Nebraska. And then Browder, a tight end coming in from UCF. And, of course, you got a safety there in Walker. He's coming in from Georgia Tech. So, I mean, transfer portal, I mean, this team really isn't losing a whole lot to that. They are only gaining some players there. So, I mean, I'm overall not too concerned about that. Recruiting-wise, this team looks pretty good as well. 17th in the nation, 8th in the SEC. And, I mean, it just shows how outstanding the SEC is with recruiting. I mean, you got Tennessee who's 17th in the nation, but they're 8th in the SEC. So, I mean, you got 8 SEC teams in the top 17, which is pretty incredible. But you got 7 4-stars coming in, 14 3-stars as well. So, recruiting-wise, doesn't look bad going into next season. But looking at your schedule now going into next season, you start off the season with Ball State at home. Then you got Pittsburgh, of course, the second. You're that home and home against Pitt. Pitt's not going to be quite as good next season versus how they were in 2021, but still on the road could be a challenge. Then you got Akron at home, Florida at home to start off your conference schedule. LSU on the road, Alabama, UT Martin, and then Kentucky. So you're at home for a good chunk of your October. You got Georgia on the road. So you're on the road in November quite a bit. You play Georgia on the road, Missouri at home, and then South Carolina and Vanderbilt to finish out this season. So looking at the first half here, Ball State, I'm going to say it's an easy win. Ball State was decent last year, but I don't know about 2022. Pitt, I'm going to favor Tennessee in that game on the road. Once again, Pitt not having Kenny Pickett. They're losing a few other key stars there for sure, so I don't expect Pitt to be quite as good next season. So I'll favor the Vols there. Akron, easy win there. Florida, LSU, both are going to be close games, but I will favor Tennessee against both Florida and LSU. The LSU game could be tough on the road, but I'm gonna favor it towards Tennessee. That Florida game, of course, I mean, you never know with Florida. That team is so inconsistent, but I'll pick the Vols in that game right now. And then Alabama at home, Crimson Tide, obviously going to be a contender once again next season with, I mean, they're probably my national favorite to win the title. I mean, you got so much talent coming back. I mean, you thought Alabama was good last season. They're going to be even better next year. So I'll favor the Crimson Tide in that game, even though it's at home for Tennessee. And looking at the second half of the season, UT Martin, easy win for sure. Kentucky, Georgia. That Kentucky game is tough. I'm going to favor the Wildcats barely right now, but, I mean, Kentucky, they're going to be good next season. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Wildcats got the win there. But that game is pretty much a coin toss for me right now between Kentucky and Tennessee. I just have it falling towards Kentucky right now. Georgia, I'll favor the Bulldogs there on the road. Missouri, close one there, but I'll favor Tennessee. South Carolina on the road, that also is tough here. I mean, Tennessee, this team, their ceiling honestly could be is 10. I've got them at 10-2. I mean, this team is very capable of going 10-2 next season. I think Alabama and Georgia are both losses, but I mean, this team is very capable of beating Kentucky, very capable of beating South Carolina as well. I just have it falling towards both those teams against the Vols right now. But I mean, Missouri, yeah, I'm gonna say that's a one towards favorite towards Tennessee. But South Carolina, I mean, Spencer Rattler, that team's gonna be good. I think they'll be better next season. I don't know if they'll be great, but I mean, they'll be good enough to definitely give Tennessee a battle on that one. And then Vanderbilt finish out the season. I'll keep that as a yellow game, but definitely I'm going to favor Tennessee in that one. So record projection, 6-6 to 10-2 for this team. The floor is pretty low, and the ceiling's pretty high for this team. It's kind of hard to predict how Tennessee's going to do, but I honestly would put the floor at 7-5 for this team. I have it at 6-6 right now, but I think, I mean, 7-5 is probably a more reasonable floor. Like, that's the worst they could be. I think 10-2, though, as the ceiling. This team is very capable of getting 9-10 wins next season, and we'll see what I predict in our final predictions coming out here in a couple of months. I'll be going through these games one by one, but for now, this team looks, I would say, pretty good to definitely cause some noise in the SEC. But that said, let me know your thoughts and comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Get you on the next one.